Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am an ordained minister, a certified yoga teacher. I teach meditation and do spiritual inquiry and counsel people spiritually. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about a phenomenon that happens to many people when they wake up. It happened to me. It happened to somebody who I just spoke with this week, and it's fairly common, so I wanted to discuss it. Now, I will say at the outset that there are different kinds of awakening experiences that people can have, so please don't listen to this and think that just because your experience does not conform to what I'm describing, that means something is wrong with your experience, or that this is the only way that it works, because that couldn't be further from the truth. But it is fairly common, so I do want to discuss this. This phenomenon could be described as, I've heard it described in these ways, or referred to in these ways: I had it and then I lost it. Another way that I describe it personally is the honeymoon phase, or the honeymoon period. My teacher described it, one of my teachers described it as a peak in the tent. So what is this? This is the phenomenon of waking up and experiencing the unbounded love and peace and joy that is possible for us as human beings. In fact, I suspect it's our birthright. I suspect that this is actually what we are meant to experience. But the vast majority of us don't experience that. And so we could ask the question, why? But that isn't what I want to speak about today. I want to speak about this phenomenon. So why does this phenomenon happen? What is going on? It's quite confusing. And this person who had reached out to me this week about this phenomenon was admittedly so quite confused, and I was also quite confused when this happened to me, and the way it was addressed for me personally, I feel, was not helpful. Now, I want to be careful here, because we could say that anything that happens on your spiritual path is ultimately helpful. I would not be the teacher I am today if these experiences had not happened to me. So part of what I try and do in my teaching is to clear up these kinds of issues for you and for others that might come up as you're on your path. So again, I might not know that this was a problem or an issue unless it had happened to me, which it did. So this is a part of what, this is why it's so hard to say if something was a mistake or it was bad or shouldn't have happened. It almost doesn't make sense. But having said that, I know that the way it was addressed to my experience, I don't feel like it really clarified anything or helped anything. And that was my feeling about the Zen tradition as a whole. It did an amazing job of helping me to wake up. But what many teachers are speaking about these days, and rightfully so, and I think it is very helpful, is post-awakening. Okay, we woke up, now what? There's a lot to discuss and to be aware of post-awakening. So, as I said, my teacher described this as a peak in the tent. Why did I feel like this was not helpful? Well, at the time when he said it, I had experienced the most significant experience I'd had consciously as an individual. One could argue that, you know, your physical birth was probably the most significant event of your physical life. Sure, makes sense. That was your actual birth. But an awakening is a spiritual birth. And again, I want to be clear, some people do not experience a kind of clear awakening moment. It's almost like for them looking back, they realize, oh, I'm awake, or the kind of checking in, they might be like, oh, I'm awake now, but I don't know exactly when that happened. I don't know how it happened. These sorts of things can be quite common. So again, if you're like, I don't know when I woke up, I don't know how this happened, I don't know how long it's been like this, don't be concerned about that. That isn't a problem that you need to be concerned about or worried about, okay? So, for many though, they do have a experience or a period of time where they notice that, wow, things have changed for me. This is what they mean by waking up. And for many, that is a period of immense joy and peace. Again, it really is what is possible for us as human beings. It's sort of our default state, you might say. And I've spoken about this in the past, but what's happening is, you could say the ego has become disoriented. It's not out, it's not been dismantled, and it's not been turned into an ally, but it is temporarily confused. It's temporarily not able to do the job that it normally does. And so we experience this flood of reality, of the true joy of reality and life. And it's beyond words. It's incredible. Being truly alive is such a miracle. And of course, you're alive now. The question is, are you experiencing the full joy of that life? And this is really, again, it's not just about being happy or having enough to eat or surviving. This is really thriving, but not on a physical. I'm not talking physically. I'm not talking having a new Tesla or a brand new house. Those things are fine. But there are people who have nothing or hardly anything, and yet they are experiencing the joy I'm talking about. Then there are people in our culture in the United States, they have beautiful homes like this one I'm walking past. They have more than enough abundance, and yet for the most part they live in fear. Okay, they're afraid. And here's the challenging thing, is they may not even know it. So very, very common. If you were to talk to these people and say, are you happy? They might be like, oh yeah, I'm happy. I've got enough. I'm lucky, or whatever. This is rationalization. This is intellectualization. They aren't feeling joy welling up from within them, and this is really what we want. So when someone experiences this for the first time, it can really bowl them over, and they'll be like, wow, this stuff really works. That was kind of my impression. I didn't even think anything was going to work. I wasn't looking for enlightenment or spirituality or anything else for that matter. I was just trying to do something that I was told would lower my blood pressure and help with my hyperactivity and my lack of focus and concentration. These are things that I had struggled with my entire life. And I was told that this meditation thing could help. So I was like, okay, let me try it. But instead I got a spiritual awakening. So when this happened, all of a sudden I could understand scripture, Zen scripture that I was exposed to, and when I was first exposed to it, it didn't make any sense at all. And then all of a sudden, it made perfect sense because I was experiencing reality in a different way. And the scripture was describing reality from this perspective. So from the ordinary egoic perspective, scripture was nonsense. A lot of Zen teaching and literature is nonsense. In fact, I'd say maybe most of it. But from this other perspective, all of a sudden, oh, okay, this makes sense. That was just one symptom. There were many, many others. Anyway, when I went to one of my teachers with this information, he said, oh, you got to peek in the tent. Keep meditating. Now, I don't want to say that that was bad advice, but the way that it was said and the peek in the tent really trivialized what I experienced. And what I experienced was, like I said, the most important thing that had ever happened to me that I was aware of. My birth, not really aware of it, but this I was aware of. I really experienced it, and it completely changed everything for me. So this is, I find, not uncommon in the Zen tradition, and there may be reasons for this, and they might be good reasons, and perhaps in the hands of a certain teacher, or perhaps said to a different student, this could have been the perfect thing to say and the perfect approach to it. I think what was intended was that the individual, in this case me, would not get distracted by the experience and would just continue meditating and practicing and deepening their awareness. Because I said what happened and I said it went away, right? This is what we're talking about today, not the awakening itself, which is a beautiful thing, but why does it go away? Why does it seem to go away? It doesn't actually go away, but it seems to go away. So what happens, I'd say most of the time, I can't ever say always, because what do I know? But in many instances, my own and other people's, and again, I had this conversation with someone just this week, what often happens is the ego is disoriented temporarily, and it, over time, it could be a few hours, it could be a few days, it could be a few weeks, it could be a few months, might even be a few years. That's sort of how it was for me. It would sort of come in and out of effectiveness. So it would sort of cut me off from this connection with being, feeling connected with being, and then I might feel very connected with being for a period of time, and then it would sort of reconstitute and completely, I would feel completely cut off. Now, for those of you that maybe haven't experienced this, once you experience the joy of being connected, feeling connected, that is very addictive, for lack of a better way of putting it. It is not something you want to give up. It's not easy to give up. It's easy to get distracted and think that that is the goal and the purpose, and I have to chase that. So again, I think what my teacher was intending with the peek in the tent was, don't get distracted, keep practicing, there's a lot more work to do. But again, the way it was said, at least the way that I took it, the way I felt was, okay, maybe you're not even addressing what I'm talking about, because that was a lot more than a peek in the tent. That was life altering. That was life changing. I can't forget that. I can't ignore that. Okay? So again, was I a bad student? Was my teacher a bad teacher? Was this meant to happen so I could have this talk with you today? Who knows? I know Mr. Miyagi says there's no such thing as a bad teacher, or no such thing as a bad student, only a bad teacher. So I don't know, as a student, usually you are relying on your teachers to know more than you and to sense and to guide you. And if they have sort of one way of delivering information and they can't sense whether something is landing properly, a lot of times this is really the teacher's responsibility. It's not to say that every teacher can be perfect or a teacher always knows what to say. I know that I don't. I know I've lost students over the years that perhaps had I said something differently or done something differently, I might still be able to be helping guide them to this day. So this is inevitable, and I am not trying to make myself out to be a victim or to make my teacher out to be negligent. But as a teacher myself now for many, many years, decades even, I have to say that I don't think what was said had the desired impact, which again, I feel was, okay, just continue meditating, continue doing your work. Don't get distracted by this. Because when that was said, I went looking for other answers and to other places for answers and exploring other things. And I don't think this was the intended consequence. Again, in the big picture, everything is fine. And what was said, it led me on a path that, again, makes me the teacher I am today. If you resonate with my teaching, then that might not have been the case had I not gotten lost. In fact, I might be a very strict, sort of narrow Zen teacher, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's a different teacher than I am today. So the fact that you could say my teacher, my teachers, and the Zen tradition essentially failed me, quote unquote, they woke me up, but the post-awakening phase there was a lot of suffering. Did I play a role in that? For sure. But again, if we take Mr. Miyagi's idea, then perhaps my teachers had a little more control over that than I did. But I am very grateful to my teachers, and again, I'm not here to try and put them down or say what they should have been doing. Let's just say again that I don't think, as a teacher, I don't think what was said had the desired impact, which was continue doing the hard work. In Zen, there was no conversation or discussion about waking up and then cleaning up. There definitely are texts and passages and elements where I see this is alluded to, but that distinction was not so clear. And for me, that would have been very, very helpful if it was. So what I found over the years of teaching is, at least for me as a teacher, if you follow my guidance, if you are open-minded enough, if you are disciplined enough, then very often it is not that difficult for me to help you awaken spiritually. But what many don't understand is, from my perspective, and again, this comes from a hard-won experience. From my perspective, that's the beginning of your journey. The call, what we might call the call, the desire to enter into spiritual practice, to begin meditating, to begin doing yoga, to begin listening to talks like this. This is the preamble. This is really almost the preparation, setting the groundwork for a journey that for many is a lifetime and maybe even lifetimes. I don't want to get into debate about lifetimes, reincarnation, any of that. But let's just say the work of cleaning up can extend far beyond this wake up. So, what many people experience, I experienced it, the student I was speaking to experienced it, is they wake up. And not only do you experience a lot of joy and bliss, peace, especially early on, once awake, you become aware of terrifying things. You begin to see reality differently. And things in the past that you might have thought were right and good and embraced and thought this is the way, now you're questioning that. Also, more terrifying is you begin to see yourself very clearly. And so what can happen very often is one can begin developing a distaste for oneself, because if we hold ourselves up to some imaginary ideal of how humans should be, or we compare ourselves with, say, Buddha or Christ, our ideas of them, maybe not the reality of them, we might feel like, wow, I fall really, really short of this ideal. And we might begin to judge ourselves. And that might, again, bring in a lot of anxiety, fear, depression. Now, just to be clear, this is the work of the ego. This is one of the ways that the ego can come back in. Another way the ego can come in after awakening is I'm special. That narrative. I woke up, therefore I'm special, therefore I'm correct, therefore I'm right, therefore I need to tell everyone what is right, what is good. I need to share my wisdom with the world. This is not to be confused with a genuine impulse that comes with awakening most of the time, which I might call missionary zeal. So missionary zeal, I think, is natural. In fact, if we don't experience it at all, I suspect that maybe our awakening wasn't as complete as we think, or maybe there's more to come. In fact, I think there always is more to come. But missionary zeal is the realization, oh my God, this is real, and I need to tell everybody about it, especially loved ones. This is actually one of the reasons why I'm a teacher today. Because when I was hit with missionary zeal, I was very young, I was in my 20s, and I was like, oh my God, this is real. I need to share this with everybody. I need to share this with the world. I need to share it with my loved ones, because they think like I did. They think all this spirituality business is BS, and it's not. It's actually real. Something happened, and it can happen to them. And you just know in your heart of hearts that it could happen to anybody. And so you want to share it with people. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think Zen is the only way one can experience this. I had coffee with a young woman a few weeks ago, and she'd experienced this through the Christian faith. And it makes perfect sense to me. While certain groups, certain Christian groups, certain other groups might claim exclusivity to this ability, and indeed they are probably waking people up, the truth of the matter is that no one has exclusive access to waking human beings up. There are many methods, many techniques, many teachers, many paths that all can lead to awakening. But as I alluded to earlier, in my experience as a teacher, waking people up is not actually that difficult. If you're a quote-unquote good student, And I may have to disagree with Mr. Miyagi here that I do think some students are easier to teach. They're more open to being taught. They aren't resistant. They aren't fighting with you or arguing with you or resisting. They recognize that you have their best interest in mind. Doesn't mean you're perfect as a teacher. And this is an important thing. If you're with a teacher who thinks that they're perfect, that's a problem. Likewise, I think if you think they're perfect, that's also a problem. Seriously. So forms are not perfect. No form is. I really don't care which guru you're talking about or whoever you're talking about. The form through which that which is manifesting through the form of the teacher or guru, that is perfect. And so when we see through the form to what is behind the form, we might say, oh, this is perfect. And in a sense, it's beautiful when a student is receiving that through their teacher. They're seeing that perfection that underlies the form of their teacher. But the form itself, it's not perfect. The form, no form is. It just isn't, it's not possible. So the teacher, depending on what you're talking about, depending on what you're pointing to, the individual form of teacher is never going to be perfect, and we shouldn't expect it to be. So again, a individual form who's saying, hey, I'm perfect, unless they're speaking as that which underlies the form, then this is problematic. And I think it's kind of problematic anyway. I'll just say that because I think a lot of people aren't going to understand that distinction. So a peek in the tent, the preview, this is another word we could use. Again, I don't feel that what was said to me was helpful because again, it diminished what was something that was just unbelievably powerful. It seemed to diminish it. So I sometimes refer to it as the honeymoon phase, the preview. And what do I try and emphasize about this experience to students? Again, it is the beginning, not the end. And my sense of it, my experience of it, is this. When we begin these practices, for whatever reason, we may get a preview of essentially the enlightened state. What's possible in a human life? Up to this point, most of us, at least as adults, have not experienced a prolonged, sustained experience of such joy and peace and bliss. We don't even think that that's possible. We think of happiness coming in little chunks, like a really good latte, a great night of sex, maybe for some a night partying, drinking, doing drugs. For others, they might think of some kind of spiritual ceremony, something like that. We're thinking there are these little chunks of happiness. And what our job as a human being, our job is to go through life and try and navigate in a way where we can maximize these chunks. So I'm trying to, if spiritual retreats are my thing, then I'm trying to go on as many spiritual retreats as I can, because that's when I feel some happiness or peace or joy. Or again, if I like to party, I like raves, I like drugs, then I try and maximize that experience, whatever it might be, right? Again, coffee, some people that, oh, that latte was so amazing. I'm going to go back to that coffee shop every day and have a little bit of that happiness. What we really are looking for from a spiritual perspective is, it's not to say that those things aren't great, at least some of them, but we would like a more sustained experience of peace and joy and bliss, love, connection, compassion. That's just there in the background. It's not to say that it can't be quite intense at times, it can. But this is what many people experience when they experience awakening. Because the ego is temporarily disoriented, it's not gone, but it doesn't really know how to orient itself for a little while. Doesn't know how to orient itself for a little while. We experience the reality of the situation, which again is this unbridled, uncaused peace and joy. It's a beautiful thing. So we're experiencing this, and eventually the ego, it figures out how to create that sense of separation. Again, it might do it through seeing the very real shortcomings of the form which we are embodying. Might, again, and when I say form, I don't just mean your physical form. This will include your psyche, your emotions, your thoughts, right? Your beliefs, all these things. They all are included as form. In fact, anything you could really talk about or point to is a form. There's only one formless, eternal, if you will. That's what spirituality is all about, is touching base with that, getting in touch with that. The other way, again, is, oh, I'm special. That's a very good one. That's called the spiritualized ego, right? Your ego now thinks it's spiritual. It thinks it's special. And that creates the separation necessary. I've heard it said that that is the worst type of ego to have, because it's almost impossible to dismantle. Because very often people who reach that stage or state, they become very arrogant and they stop listening to their teachers. And so they are no longer willing to take instruction from anybody. They just assume they know it all. So when you say, hey, look, you're confused about what's going on, you're not on the right path, they just be like, oh, well, you must not be as enlightened as I am. You must not know as much as I do, whatever it might be. So you definitely want to be on the lookout for that, should that show up. So we have this preview. How should we interpret the preview? From my perspective, what you ideally would do is it becomes your North Star, for lack of a better way of saying it. This now shows you what's possible in your life. You've already experienced it. You know the scent and the flavor of living in that way. Now, what happens for most people is you need to do the very difficult work of cleaning up. Wake up and then clean up, okay? So waking up, again, a spiritual awakening, in my experience, not too difficult. The cleaning up part, this is where the really hard work begins, where we start processing repressed emotions, we start investigating our beliefs, we look into the unconscious, we basically transform the forms. So the physical body, the mind, our emotional body, we basically transform these into a vehicle for embodying enlightenment, embodying that which we really are. And what that means for most of us is cleaning out this karmic junk, stuff that was programmed into us from unconscious parents and caregivers and friends and societies that they meant well, most of them. They just didn't know any better. They were teaching you what they had been taught. And for most of human history, and for most humans, what they've been taught is a lot of fear and a lot of separation and a lot of, in order for you to get what you want, someone else has to lose what they want. That's the way things essentially work. So this is what most of us experience. And just because we have an awakening, the roots of these teachings and this conditioning is a really good word to use for it. It's conditioning. Another word we could use is programming. The roots of that go very deep. And while you may have read a story like that of Eckhart Tolle's or that of Byron Katie's, where it seems like they just woke up and that was the end of it, and they were enlightened, and there's nothing more to do. If you read a little closer, you find in Byron Katie's case, she would go out into the desert and she would meditate and investigate her thinking. Eckhart Tolle spent many years sitting in a park, just watching the ducks, observing. He then started teaching very small groups. So again, if you had met these people right after their awakening, they likely would not be the teachers that you see presented to you today. The refinement, the level of understanding. It's not to say that their awakenings were not very powerful and perhaps knocked out a lot, if not most, of the egoic structure. But it sounds like in both cases, it didn't do all of it. They both had a little more cleaning up to do. I'd say those two, if I read their accounts are accurate, and if I read them properly, those two are the exception. In that, if you're listening to this and you've woken up, it's likely a lot more of your egoic structure has remained intact through no fault of your own, or your practices, or your teachers. I'd say this is much, much more common. I think this is why many people who are awake, they may not even know that they're awake, because they might assume that, well, since I still have this nasty behavior, I must not be awake. Or since I still feel separation, I must not be awake. Or since I can't read or understand the scripture, I must not be awake. Or since I'm not levitating and I can't do amazing magical miracles, I must not be awake. This is understandable, but rest assured that none of these things necessarily mean that you haven't woken up. One of the qualities of waking up is, again, recognizing that, oh, now look at this mess. Now I've got to start cleaning up, right? This is what I want you to really hear and understand from this talk, that the recognition of, ooh, there's something really ugly in me. One of the aspects of being awake is realizing that that's not really you. In fact, if we're really awake, we realize there is no us. There's no individual here. There's no separate entity. So how can we take ownership of anything? And I don't mean this in a practical sense. If you come into my house and you grab my guitar and try and leave with it and say there's no ownership, I'm going to stop you. If you leave, I'm going to call the cops. Okay? We don't want to get silly about this stuff, and sometimes people do get silly about it. But I'm talking in an ultimate sense, we recognize the truth versus the way human beings have organized their society. So again, many of the ways that we have organized things make sense and it makes life easier. Maybe one day it'll be different. But for now, the concept of owning something, having a possession, this can be useful. All right, again, if I try and lead a retreat and someone took what was my guitar, but because there are no possessions, it's not my guitar, they just took it, I show up and I have no guitar because there's no possessions. Again, this is where we get into this idea of silliness. So we don't need to go there. We don't want to go there. I don't really want to be addressing these kinds of silly ideas all the time, but I just want to put it out there that please understand that while the concepts I'm talking about are very real, and they're very true, it's not like they mean that as human beings we just wipe everything out and try and live from these principles. That is putting too much emphasis on the spiritual. We could say on the yin aspect or the yang aspect. We're too far off on one side. And what I've always advocated for and encouraged for my students is balance. So yes, we want to be connected to source, to the source of our being, to our true nature. Absolutely. In order to be happy, there's no other choice. But we also want to recognize and honor the forms, because why not? Why pretend that they don't exist? Why pretend that they're not here? Why pretend that they're not real? These are all things that have been said in the past in spirituality. They have some truth in them, and they could be helpful teachings for some individuals at a certain phase or stage in their understanding. But they don't pertain to ultimate truth. There is a deeper truth in which this body, this tree, this thought, this video is as real as anything else that is appearing. The ultimate reality transcends the forms that appear within it, but the forms are a part of that ultimate reality. So why should we discount those forms? We just want to be clear about what they are. So again, if I start chasing after phantoms, if I start chasing, let's say I have a dream, and in the dream I'm in the perfect house, and then I wake up and I say, well, I need to go back to my perfect house. Well, I can't. It was a dream, it was a phantom. And so that's how a lot of us live in this world, where we're chasing after something that isn't really possible in this world. And even if it were, it would not be satisfying. Most of us don't realize, but we're actually on a spiritual, even someone who's chasing after money is on a spiritual journey. They are trying to fill a spiritual hole. And for them, they might believe, and they may even experience temporarily, that having lots of money does that for them. That is just part of their spiritual journey, but it's still a spiritual journey. So what do I want you to take away from this talk and what I'm discussing? Again, see that experience of I had it and then I lost it. See that as a preview. And see it as encouragement for you to now start to do the difficult psychological work of cleaning up your unconscious, your psyche, and perhaps your body as well, because a lot of this stuff can show up in the body. The body can really guide the way when it comes to emotional content. If the psyche, the nervous system are not okay, the body will not feel okay. This doesn't mean you need to be in perfect health or have amazing flexibility or be able to do every yoga pose. That's, again, silliness and please don't go there. But having a relative amount of physical ease for most people is going to be vital to experiencing the peace, joy, and happiness that is possible for us in this life. Without a certain amount of physical ease, we will likely find that suffering ensues. Again, I'm not going to say that it's absolutely required. I know that there can be people who are in a lot of physical pain, maybe bedridden, and still spiritually they're experiencing this peace and joy that I'm speaking about. But that is a fairly high level of accomplishment, you might say, in a way. So I don't wish that experience on anybody, but if it does happen to you, you can get there. Just know that that's possible. So I had it, I lost it, I got a peek in the tent, I had the preview, the honeymoon is now over, what do I do? Well, again, that was in a sense the easy part. That in a sense was the fun part of your spiritual journey. It may have taken you a lifetime to get there. It may have taken a lot of hard work to get there. But as far as I'm concerned, that is the beginning of your journey. Before that, you were not yet on the path. So think of it like hiking. Maybe you want to hike this beautiful path up to the top of Mount Fuji, and maybe that path itself is going to be arduous and difficult. But in order to get on the path from the United States, where I live, I would have to take a car or a car trip to the airport. I'd have to navigate the airport and customs. I would have to take a flight to Japan, a long flight. I would have to take a train from the airport to a hotel of some sort. From that hotel, I would likely take another train and then a taxi to get to the foot of Mount Fuji. And then once I was at the foot of Mount Fuji, I could actually start hiking Mount Fuji. Was all the stuff before necessary in order to hike Mount Fuji? Yeah, for me it was, because of where I live. And this is how it is spiritually. Some people, unbeknownst to them and to others, they're living at the foot of the spiritual path. For them, it doesn't take much to wake up. A few meditation sessions, maybe even hearing just one talk, reading a book, doing nothing sometimes. People just wake up. Just happens. But for most people, when that happens, again, there is the path ahead. Do some people maybe, do they actually live on Mount Fuji partway up or almost all the way up? Sure, I think it's possible. But I think this is rare, and I wouldn't assume that of yourself. You probably know. And again, I would be very careful about assuming that, oh, well, I was born with all this spiritual understanding and knowledge. You may have been interested in spirituality from a very young age. You may even have understood certain things. But for most of us, it goes a lot more like what I'm describing. We first have to travel to the foot of Mount Fuji, the spiritual path, to the foot of that, the start of that path. That may be quite a journey for some and maybe even most. But once you are there, once you wake up, once you have this kind of experience that I'm describing, don't get attached to it. So my teacher was right. You don't want to get attached to that experience, because you likely have a lot of work ahead. But that experience, the way I would like you to regard it and think about it, that is your North Star. That is what you are trying to recreate. That is what you are trying to get back to, and you can. But how you get there will likely take a lot of work. You will likely need guidance along the way and help along the way, and there's nothing bad or wrong about that. It doesn't mean that you're spiritually unintelligent. In fact, the person who seeks out help when she needs it is the one who's really intelligent, right? Who's more intelligent? Someone who tries to climb Mount Fuji with no direction, no signs, no guidance, no GPS, nothing, just trying to climb on their own, just randomly from nowhere, or the person who seeks out assistance. This is what many people are trying to do in the modern culture. Is it seems like there's such a wealth of spiritual information out there, they try and pick and choose. But what this is like is a bit like having one map, starting to walk up the trail looking at one map, and then throwing that map away and then taking another map that describes the trail from the opposite side of the mountain, and then trying to use that map to continue on your journey. And then getting frustrated with that map because it actually doesn't correspond with the trail you're on, throwing that map away, taking another map that describes coming up from perhaps the east side of the mountain. So I hope this makes sense to you. This isn't to say that you can't find a new teacher if the person you're working with isn't resonating with you or isn't able to help you. This isn't to say that all teachers are created equal. This isn't to say that all teachers can take you the distance. But we just want to be mindful of these pitfalls because these will impede our quote-unquote progress. What do I mean by progress? What I want for you is that peace, joy, and connection that is possible. This isn't a short-term goal. This isn't the kind of happiness that we experience, again, from a good cup of coffee or a great vacation or something like that. This is a deeper underlying connectedness with the fabric of being. And we feel very at home in this world, and we really get to enjoy this world. This takes us from experiencing this world as a kind of a hell to a heaven. And this is very real. So I want to be clear about that, that this is one of the litmus tests for how close have I come to returning to that awakened experience, right? And again, I want to be clear, it does not mean that your awakening disappeared. In fact, a lot of the quote-unquote problems and a lot of the disturbance now is actually coming from the awakeness, if that makes sense. Again, let's say I was asleep in my house and I was dreaming, and I dreamt that my house was clean and everything was in order. And then I wake up in my house and I find that it's a disaster. That might be very disturbing, but that's the reality. I found that when I was asleep, I was actually sleeping, let's say, in a rat-infested environment, a very dangerous environment that might make me sick or ill, right? I would want to know that. Even though while I was asleep, it seemed like everything was perfect. This is where most of us are. Things are not perfect. We are not even really happy. We don't even necessarily even know what that would feel like. And yet we think everything is fine. We think our house is in order. In fact, we might think we're killing it. We might think, hey, I'm winning this. Look at my bank account. Look at my spouse. Look at my children. Look at all the things I've achieved. I'm killing it. We might really believe that. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a beautiful spouse, beautiful house, beautiful children. Okay, so please don't misunderstand me. But again, there are people who have none of those things, and they are just experiencing the joy of being. And this is what we want. Irrespective of circumstance, we want to experience the joy of being, and this is possible for you. Okay? So again, if I'm asleep, it seems like everything's fine. I wake up, oh my God, there's so many issues, there's so many problems. Well, again, this is part of the consequence of being awake. Now I see that I have work to do. And so this is again why I feel that the way that I was told, peek in the tent doesn't really communicate any of that. It doesn't really inspire me. Maybe it does you, but it doesn't inspire me to want to continue. It sounds like, in fact, peek in the tent sounds like I got something that was undeserved. I got to see something that I wasn't supposed to. And again, to me, this really was not helpful. And so what I'm trying to do today is, again, from my own experience, from maybe the shortcomings of the way that I was taught, to fix that. So if you've had this peek in the tent, if you've had this preview, if you've had the awakening experience and it seems to have left or gone away, please know that this is expected, it's normal, it's natural, and the way I want you to interpret it is, okay, now I have to get to work. Now, if you're unclear about what that means, please reach out to me. Again, there seems to be a lot more information and teaching about awakening, because as a teacher, I'll say that's the easier part of it. That's also the quicker part of it. It's the fun part. So there are many, from my perspective, there are many teachers who teach awakening and then that's it. And people just hang around them. And they just think that because the teacher woke them up, that now they're just one of their followers or something like that. And that's what they do now. From my perspective, this is not the right way. This is not a good way. But having said that, I think while it's much more clear and there's much more consensus and clarity about how to wake someone up, I think there's a lot less about the cleaning up process. So again, what kind of mess do you have in your house? I don't know. What do we need to clean up your house? I don't know. Not all houses are the same. We might need trash bags for one house. For another house, we might need paint. For another house, we might need to tear up the carpets. It really is hard to say. And this is why what you'll find is very often the discussion about post-awakening. It's much less step-oriented. That's for a reason. Maybe one day as teachers, over time, we'll figure out how to create a step-by-step process like that leads to awakening. But I don't know if this is possible, because the experiences we have growing up are so different. And what traumatizes one person may not traumatize someone else. All right, everyone. So I hope you found this helpful. Please let me know in the comments your experience with this, if you've experienced this, if this has helped clear things up at all for you. I do want to thank my patrons on Patreon. They help make these talks possible. And if you'd like to join that community, please check out the links. You could help support this teaching. Likewise, if you're still here listening, I want to thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, please give me the thumbs up. leave a comment, subscribe. All those things help spread the word. Thanks again, and until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful day.